with your permission, I'll begin today's proceedings. It gives me very great pleasure to be here today with you on the occasion of the Chaitanyamayi Devi Memorial Lecture of the year 2016. And we are fortunate to have with us today, as the speaker of the day, Professor Ashis Roy, formerly professor at the University of Calcutta, a professor of political science and of international relations. He is also attached to the faculty in this institution, and I must say that I am looking forward very much, as I'm sure you are, to what he would tell us today. I would like to read out from the statement that the Institute would like to make on the Chaitanyamayi Devi Memorial Lecture. The statement is as follows. In the year 1905, Chaitanyamayi Devi was born at Paikhand in the district of Pabna, now in Bangladesh. By virtue of her deep devotion to Sri Ramakrishna, she became gradually known as Nanima or Boroma in her locality, Bahajutin Polli near Jadavpur. Ma Chaitanyamayi in later life came into close contact with Swami Vivekananda, who invited her to join the Brahmacharya ashrama. She could get in touch along with Swami Sivananda, Swami Turiyananda, and Swami Vivekananda. She was certainly under the good books of all these spiritual giants, as well as direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. She did also have golden opportunities to get associated with Swami Vivekananda's disciples, Swami Paramananda and Swami Sadashivananda. In view of all these, she would often consider herself as a blessed woman. Then the statement goes on to say that Ma Chaitanyamayi came to Calcutta in 1931-32, visited Balur Math, and thus developed her long association with the Ramakrishna Mission. Further, it is said that on 26th October 1984, she passed away at Hardwar, and this memorial lecture is arranged with the help of donation offered by late Pandit Dinesh Chandra Bhattacharya Shastri, one of her spiritual children. I'm happy and feel blessed that we are meeting on the occasion of remembering this memorable person. And now I would invite Dr. Ashis Kumar Roy to deliver his lecture on Swami Vivekananda's perception of history with the subtitle Beyond Marx. Dr. Ashis Roy.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for this introduction. Respected Secretary Maharaj and the congregation of the pilgrims, my fellow pilgrims rather, trust me, I call myself a pilgrim always. Whenever I set my feet in this hallowed shrine of learning, I think I'm on a pilgrimage. And so you are today. You are here to hear me on a very strange topic. I'm going to speak on two personalities who are strange to each other, Karl Marx and Swami Vivekananda. Karl Marx, who said that religion is the opium for mankind. On the other hand, Swamiji said again and again that religion is the one and only occupation in Indian life. So with this contrast, in the two personalities strange to each other, I am supposed to speak on these two personalities and their thoughts. I am personally grateful to Ma Chaitanyamayi's bountiful bequest, which has enabled me to be here to address you in this mellow evening on the topic I have already mentioned. Now, it is very difficult to squeeze in a topic or a theme of encyclopedic dimension into a 45-50 minute time frame. So please excuse me if I hurry through and miss some points. But one thing I can tell you, that in order to substantiate my statements, my treatise or rather presentation, I'll be quoting heavily from Swami Vivekananda's complete works in his own inimitable language, so that I can drive home the points I'm supposed to make in this presentation. Now, Karl Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto in 1848 and Das Kapital, a Kritik zur Political Economy, in 1867. In 1867, Swamiji was a toddler. He was born in 1863. Anyway, why Marx? I start with Marx because he was the man who made a very disparaging distinction between the European civilization on the one hand and the Asiatic civilization on the other. Born in the cradle of the European society, he always thought of the superiority of the European civilization and always tried to minimize the importance of the Asiatic civilization, for that matter, the Indian civilization in particular. I'll come to that. Now, Marx was spinning out his apocalypse regarding Asia on two terms. One is the Asiatic mode of production, and the other is despotism. These two key statements figured in his treatise on the Asian social system in general and the Indian social system in particular. Now, he said, as a European, his views were always Eurocentric, and he said that, rather Marx said that the European civilization was markedly superior to the Asiatic civilization. I mean, he did not mention about the civilization, Asiatic society, he said, because he said that Asia didn't have any civilization as such. It was fast asleep when Europe was awake. Now, I'll come very briefly as to his statement on the Asiatic mode of production and the despotism. He said that there are two features in the Asiatic mode of production. That is, one is that a rudimentary agrarian system based on a cluster of village communities, insulated from one another, and they had a very rudimentary agrarian system. Two, at the top of this rudimentary agrarian system was the despotic state, which was appropriating the major portion of the surplus produced by these undifferentiated village communities. In return, that despotic state, through a set of petty officials used to construct and maintain a very crude irrigation system which was absolutely necessary for cultivation. Otherwise, the surplus production won't be in the pocket of this despotic state. Another thing by which Marx marked up the superiority of the European society is the institution of private property. He said that private property is the hallmark of the advanced society of Europe, while the absence of private property, only the communal property was there in the Asiatic social system. So that made the Asiatic society a very crude, primitive, these are the superlatives used for Asia, primitive, promiscuous, barbaric society. And this society was beyond redemption without the help of Western intervention. If the West intervenes, then there will be light or there won't be any light. Asia will be steeped in eternal darkness. That was precisely what Marx said about Asia, because in his view, there was no private property system in Asia. Everything was communal. But unfortunately, Marx's thinking about Asia was a bit sclerotic, because there was a bit of misperception about Asia. He didn't study China, because when Europe had private property system, China had it also, but he overlooked it. So this was a partial study of Asia made by Marx. Then what did Marx say about India? It is more disparaging, more uncharitable than what he spoke about Asia. I'll just read out a few lines from his own articles. He wrote 2 articles in 1863, June, July, in New York Daily Tribune. One is British rule in Asia, and the other is future results of British rule in Asia. These were the 2 articles that are published in New York Daily Tribune. Now he was ejaculating in such a manner. We mustn't forget that he was saying this about India. These idyllic communities, inoffensive though they may appear, had always been the solid foundation of Oriental despotism, just referred to. That they restrained the human mind within the smallest possible compass, making it unresisting tool of superstition, enslaving it beneath the traditional rules. We mustn't forget that this undignified, stagnatory, and vegetative life, vegetative life, that this passive sort of existence evoked on the other part, in contradistinction, wild, aimless, unbounded forces of destruction, and rendered murder itself a religious rite in Hindustan. We mustn't forget that they transformed a self-developing social state into never-changing natural destiny, thus brought about a brutalizing worship of nature, exhibiting its degradation in the fact that man, the sovereign of nature, fell down on his knees in adoration of Hanuman, the monkey, and Sabala, the cow. This was he was writing about India. But unfortunately, for Marx, he made the 19th century, when he was writing in 1863 in New York Daily Tribune, he marked up the 19th century Indian social scenario as the starting point of Indian history. He never mentioned that India had thousands of years of civilization, which he didn't take note of in these two articles. So as if the 19th century is the beginning of the Indian history. This is very unfortunate. And also, as I said, very sclerotic thinking about the Indian civilization. And here comes in the relevance of Swami Vivekananda. There is hardly any evidence to show that Swamiji had read the Marxist literature, because I don't know, and nor have I found anywhere that he was dwelling on the Marxist literature. He never mentioned that. But through Sister Nivedita, he was introduced to Kropotkin, the anarchist leader, whom he met in Paris in 1900 and exchanged ideas about the Indian socio-economic system. He made Carpenter and a host of other social democrats in London, and also had gone through the writings of other anarchist leaders of Russia. So he was well aware of the anarcho-socialist literature, but I don't know if he had at all gone through Marx, if he had any time or if he had any opportunity. What we can discern from his writings, speeches, and epistolary exchanges, we find that somewhere Swamiji spoke of some sort of socialism, but that was not in line with the socio-anarchist thinking of the Western leaders or even Marx. His philosophy was absolutely based on the Vedantic egalitarianism. And that egalitarianism is a mystic one, is a metaphysical one, which doesn't have any connection with either Marxist or anarchist or any other socialist thought structures. Now, when we read Swamiji's views, we find that he admonished very strongly the Western writers about writing, making those disparaging remarks about the Indian civilization. I'll just quote some of Swamiji's observations. He said, I used to read books written by globetrotting travelers, especially foreigners, who deplored the ignorance of the Eastern masses. Again, in a disgusting manner, he writes, to many, Indian thought, Indian manners, Indian customs, Indian philosophy, Indian literature are repulsive at the first sight, but let them persevere, let them read, let them become familiar with the great principles underlying these ideas, and it is 99-1 that the charm will come over them and fascination will be the result. So this way he admonished the Western writers about not understanding the soul of India, the civilization and the spirit of the Indian society. Elsewhere he said about India, I quote from his complete works, India has for thousands of years peacefully existed, here actively prevailed, when even Greece did not exist, when Rome was not thought of, when the very fathers of modern Europeans lived in forests and painted themselves blue. Even earlier, when history has no record, tradition does not peer into the gloom of the intense past, even from then until now, ideas after ideas marched out from her, but every word has been spoken with a blessing behind it and peace before it. We of all nations of the world have never been a conquering race, and that blessing is on our head, and therefore we live. this is the tradition and the spirit of Indian civilization upheld by Swamiji in his complete works. Now, this is a very long article. It's not possible to discuss everything and anything in this small time space allotment. But I've already told you about Marx's disposition and Swamiji's disposition. Now I'll go quickly over the religious scriptures. Now in the West, there is a notion that the religious scriptures, like Bibles and others, were the oracles of God handed down to his own messengers from time to time. But in India, we have a different notion, different belief, different faith about the Vedas. We call these Vedas apaurushya, never committed to writing by anyone. They existed alongside with the Indian civilization. But the Vedanta, the end of the Vedas, but not the appendix, is the transmuted and sublimated essence of the high spiritual thinking all over the world. This is Vedanta. It is not Vedanta. If we make a Shundi Vichcheda, Vedanta, not that. It is not the appendix, not the gist, but the transmuted and sublimated essence of the high spiritual thinking on earth. And the nucleus of the Vedanta is what Swamiji and others said, prasthana traya. What are the three factors that constitute the Vedanta? The Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and the Madhbhagavad Gita. These are the three factors which are contained in the Vedanta. And the key word in the Vedanta is Shamadarshan. That is, everything and everybody belong to Brahma. Sarvang Kallidang Brahma. That is what is the slogan of the Vedanta. Now, from the Vedantic metaphysics, Swamiji stepped down to some practical purposes, to what is called the Smritis. Because Vedantic cosmology, Vedantic spiritualism is the highest thing, but to generalize in the society the principles of Vedanta in a practical level, he spoke of the Smritis. What are these Smritis? They are customs, traditions, rituals, folkways, and mores, composed by sages at different periods of history, and these Smritis are always subject to additions, alterations, because Swamiji says that these Smritis, a group of Smritis, a bunch of Smritis would be relevant for one yuga, one age. That is, some Smritis would be relevant for Satya Yuga, some for Treta, some for Dwapara, and some for the Kali Yuga. But they would be either fused or changed or modified or added. But Vedanta is the ultimate principle of the society. It is unchangeable, it is eternal. But cities are subject to changes and modifications. And according to Swamiji, the Vedantic cosmology is the key to the development and advancement of human society. Now, addressing the Hindus in Jaffna, Sri Lanka, Swamiji said, among other things inter alia, the question of creation, that is nature, Prakriti, Maya is infinite, without beginning. It is not that this world was created the other day, not that a God came, created the world, and since that time has been sleeping. For that cannot be. The creative energy is still going on. God is eternally creating. But this notion of creation in English has a very crude idea, like something out of nothing, existence out of non-existence. But according to Swamiji, the proper word for creation itself is projection. That is, everything is projected through the time and space. This is the ingrained feature of Vedantic cosmology. Now, this fascinating elucidation of the phenomenon of projection is contained in one of Swamiji's writings. He says, the whole of this nature exists, it becomes finer, subsides, and then after a period of rest, as it were, the whole thing is again projected forward, and the same combination, the same evolution, the manifestation appear, remain playing as it were for a certain time, only again to break into pieces, to become finer and finer until the whole thing subsides and again comes out. Thus, it goes backwards and forwards with a wave-like motion throughout eternity. Time, space, and causation are all within this nature. To say, therefore, that it had a beginning is utter nonsense. No question can occur as to its beginning or its end. It means the beginning and the end of one particular cycle. That is the law of cycles, or what he calls prolaya. These are the cycles. And Swamiji said that there is no linear progress as enshrined, as given to us by Hegel and Marx, that it moves through, human history moves through dialectics in a straight line, but not that. He said there is no straight line. A straight line projected indefinitely would end in a cycle, and it will go back to the starting point. So this is the cycle of prolaya according to Swamiji. There won't be any stop, any full stop. We can't shackle history, we can't guide history. It will move on and on and on. So when Hegel said that in his four-state monarch-God equation, he found his concrete absolute, the negation of negation. But it has to go on ad infinitum. But he tried to shackle history, and he became a failed philosopher. So did Marx. Of course, to tell you very frankly, I'm a student of Marxism, but not a practicing Marxist. Marx also made the same mistake. He tried to shackle history, but whenever he was projecting the dialectical materialism, it will never stop. He said with the proletarian society and with the state withering away the history, as if this is the last stop of the journey of history. Not that. It is a cycle of prolaya. It will go on and on and on in a circular order, and it will never stop. We can't stop history. We can't guide history. There is nothing like inevitability of the historical motion. Neither we can guide it. We can change it somewhere like Napoleon or say Hitler for some time, but not for all the time, not always. So this is the statement on projection by Swami Vivekananda. He says that this creative process goes on through a couple of processes. One is evolution and the other is involution. Evolution is the process of expansion when things are becoming more complex from the simpler forms. And involution is the extraction of the process when from complexities things are moving to the simple stage. But they are interrelated with each other in a secular motion, secular fashion. And these are what he calls evolution and involution. Now, I think I have some time left.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I'll come to the conception of God. Now to Hegel, as I've already told you, in his equation, the Prussian king is the God. The state is the march of God on earth. And this is the absolute, concrete absolute according to Hegel. And he had an axe to grind because he wanted to curry favor with the Prussian monarch. He wanted a special status and certain privileges for himself. So he equated the Prussian monarchy, or that particular monarch of his times, with God. And he said the state is the march of God on earth, and it is personified in the Prussian monarch. Marx also started as an atheist. But ultimately, somewhere in his writing, he retained the cosmic sort of wishfulness or wishful thinking that somewhere in history there will be a cosmic intervention. So this is un-Marxist, but it is hinted in his writings. This was said by philosopher Bertrand Russell. But what is God according to Swami Vivekananda? He said that the English word God cannot comprehend the nature of God, because God is beyond thought and expression, abang manasa gochara. We can't bind him with our thought and expression. So he classified the conception of God. One is the personal God, and the other is impersonal God. Now I just read out. There were two ideas of God in our scriptures. The one, the personal, and the other, the impersonal. The idea of personal God is that he is the omnipresent creator, preserver, and destroyer of everything, the eternal Father and Mother of the universe, but one who is eternally separate from us and from all souls, and liberation consists in coming near to him and living in him. Then there is the other idea of the impersonal God, where all those adjectives are taken away as superfluous, as illogical. In the Vedas, it is not the word he, but it is used, for he would make an invidious distinction, as if God were a man. No, it, the impersonal, is used, and this impersonal it is preached. This system is called the Advaita. So ultimately, he says, we and he are one. Everyone is but a manifestation of the impersonal, the basis of all being. And misery consists in thinking of ourselves different from this infinite, impersonal being. And liberation consists in knowing our unity with this wonderful impersonality. So this is what he calls Brahman. And he has rightly says, in the Vedas, God is addressed as it and not he, because that will make an invidious distinction, that God is a man and not a woman. Not that. It. Now I am almost in the last leg of my presentation. I'm squeezing in because it's a very long essay, which hopefully will be published in this bulletin in the near future. So I'll further squeeze in the last leg of my presentation. That is, again we are back to the square one with Marx. Marx said that the Indian society, with all its vices, with its promiscuity, with its barbaric tendency, and with its worship of the Hanuman and the cow and so on. So it is beyond redemption. Only the British rule can deliver the goods. It can bring light to the Indian civilization, rather Indian society. He was not used to speaking of India as a civilized country, ever. Because of his Eurocentric tendency, he had his own psychosomatic problem about Asia, about his attitude towards Asia. And he never called Asiatic civilization, only system and structure, these words he used for Asia and India. But Swamiji had a mixed reaction to the British rule in India. Mixed in the sense that he said that British rule delivered some good for the Indian society. Now, what is this good done by the British rule in India? I quote again from Swamiji. Hailing the revolutionary ethics of the British occupation of India, Swamiji says, everybody knows how much the world owes to India's spirituality and what a potent factor in the present and the past of humanity have been the spiritual powers of India. These are the things of the past, he regrets. These are the things of the past. We forgot our past. I find another most remarkable phenomenon, and that is the most stupendous powers of the civilization and progress towards humanity and social progress have been effected by the Anglo-Saxons. The wonderful race, I mean the Anglo-Saxons. I see the same Anglo-Saxon powers working here with all their defects, but retaining their peculiarly characteristic good features. And I believe that in the at last the grand result is achieved. The British idea of expansion and expression is forcing us up. In India we think, but unfortunately we think too much, so that we cannot express ourselves. He says this, in India we think, but unfortunately sometimes we think so deeply that there is no power left for expression. The backbone of Western civilization is expansion and expression. This side of the work of the Anglo-Saxon race in India, to which I draw your attention, is calculated to rouse our nation once again, to express itself, and it is inciting it to bring out its hidden treasures before the world by using the means of communication provided by the same mighty race. The Anglo-Saxons have created a future for India, and the space through which our ancestral ideas are now ranging is simply phenomenal. So this is the bright side of the British colonial rule in India, which was highlighted by Swamiji. But at the same time, he pointed out the fiendish character of the British colonial rule. It was one of plunder, exploitation, torture, destruction of the Indian economy, and pauperization of the Indian masses. Very, very precisely I told the Swamiji's views, I have told you, because he said many other things, but there is hardly any time to refer to all these things. So this is a fiendish character of the British colonial rule in India. It's plunder, it's torture, it's exploitation, its destruction of the Indian economy, the rural economy as such, because India was not industrialized at that point of time, and also the pauperization of the Indian masses. These are the fiendish characters of the British rule, colonial rule in India. There's another thing which Swamiji also highlighted. That is the social metamorphosis created by the British rule in India. That is the Shudrayan of the Indian society. Now this is the last paragraph I'll read out for you. What shall I say of India, let alone her Shudra class, her Brahmins, to whom belonged the acquisition of scriptural knowledge, are now the foreign professors, her Kshatriyas, the ruling Englishmen, Vaishyas, too, the English in whose bone and marrow is the instinct of trade, so that only the Shudranes, the beast of burdenness, is now left with the Indian themselves. He regrets that a cloud of impenetrable darkness has at present equally enveloped us all. Now there is neither firmness of purpose, nor boldness of enterprise, neither courage of heart, nor strength of mind, neither aversion to maltreatments by others, nor dislike for slavery. But what we have in India are only deep-rooted envy and strong antipathy against one another, morbid desire to ruin by hook or by crook the weak, and to lick dog-like the feet of the strong. What to speak separately of the distinct Shudra class of such a land, where the whole population has virtually come down to the level of Shudras. So this Shudrayan was also a process which was completed during the British rule. We became slaves. And this was later referred to by the social scientists as the dependency complex. Even today also, we suffer from the same colonial hangover of a dependency complex, because we treat our brethren, our fellow people, like the same order or same fashion as did the British. So this is what is called the dependency complex. Because much of the British colonial system is still retained in India. And we have a fraction of the parliamentary democracy, which is neither democracy nor parliamentary. It is a sort of cocktail political culture we have inherited from the British. And that's why once Galbraith said that India is a functioning chaos. It is functioning, but chaotically. It's moving on somehow. It is an eight-legged monster. Somehow it's moving hither, thither. It's a functioning chaos. So this is in the main about the British rule, about Swamiji's notion on the British rule, colonial rule in India, the pros and the cons. But then what is the future for India left? He says that in the face of diversities, in terms of language, in terms of religion, in terms of castes and creeds and communities, India is virtually a natural history museum. But what can save India in the face of such diversities? He says the religion is the only way out for us. One religion. By one religion, he didn't mean that there cannot be other religions like the Christianity or the Islam or Zoroastrianism or Buddhism. But this religion is rooted in the egalitarianism, in the brotherhood, in the forbearance of the Vedantic religion. And Thakur Ramakrishna also preached this sort of eclectic religious practice. He practiced it and he preached it also. Religious eclecticism. He took the kernels of all the religions, but ultimately it was a great eclectic religion which he presented, and the standard bearer of which was Swami Vivekananda. Just my last quotation, which Swamiji made at the Chicago Parliament of Religions in 1893, he declared, sectarianism, bigotry, horrible fanaticism have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. But that their time is come, and I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in the honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or with the pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal. So this was the key message to the humanity. And today we find that religious fundamentalism is ruling the roost. There is so much of bloodletting. There is so much of death of the civilian population. And this has a tendency to what is called a blowback situation, where murder would be taken revenge by another murder, leading to democide in the whole society. So what is the way out? I am not a Nostradamus to soothsay something, but let me conclude. Please hark the clarion call of the Shvetashvara Upanishad, Sinmantu Vishve Amritasya Putraha. Om Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Roy. It was a most interesting presentation. I may have, of course, some difference with minor points, but the one major point that I would like to make is that perhaps in looking at Vivekananda's views on history, one could look more closely at books such as Bortoman Bharat or Prachyo Paschatto, and some of his travel accounts where he talks of his, he reflects on the difference between India and other worlds, and so on. What I mean to say is that these are Vivekananda's reflections on history which come out of the encounter of history with the present. And I think that's where his thoughts are most relevant and clearest. If you look at Vivekananda's writings, where he is talking of history in the abstract, as you have done mostly, you get one version of his view of history, no doubt, but I suggest that we look at the history that you get, his history based of his view of history as you get, for instance, in Prachyo Paschatto, where he talks about the conflict between the East and West, which is the central thing in modern Indian history. You know, that's what he focuses on, and he says that, you see, you have on the one hand the West with its command of science and technology and a high consumption that is thus enabled in Europe, and on the other you have a society which is marked with poverty, but who at the same time has the precious possession of ancient wisdom. If you look at Bortoman Bharat again, you know, he's talking about this contraposition between contemporary India and the India of the past, the ancient past. That is where, you know, my vision of Vivekananda as a historical thinker is strongly influenced by those writings. Again, to me, Vivekananda as a historian comes out clearly when you look at his travel accounts, written in beautifully colloquial way, not in Sadhu Bhasha, but in spoken language, where he talks continually of the difference between the India as he lived in and the countries where he visited. And you see the specificities of Indian civilization and it's as it's evolved in the past very clearly. Again, I find Vivekananda's view of history in the readings of the Biplabis and the nationalists. Why did the Biplabis find Vivekananda an absolutely important text for them? It was an important text for them because they saw that here was an attempt to reconcile the ancient India civilization with the modern demands and so on. Again, I find Vivekananda's views on history very interesting in the readings of, in the way Jawaharlal Nehru read him, where Nehru repeatedly quotes Vivekananda a number of, maybe, a dozen times in Discovery of India. And he says over and over again that Vivekananda's view of history is very important because he admired that past, but he did not want India to live in that past anymore. So, all these, to me, also represents Vivekananda's view of history. It is not just in the abstract thoughts about cyclical pattern in history or in the spiritual significance of reflecting on the past and so on. And also, Vivekananda's view of history was such that he greatly emphasized unity in diversity. This is one of the great things that Vivekananda repeatedly talked about when think of Indian history, was Indian history displayed a capacity to reconcile diversities, and thus he thought it was an object lesson to the communities. And of course he linked that with Ramakrishna, because he thought that he was like one of the saints of medieval and early times who proposed to the world that all parts of religion lead to the same object, to the same end. And who was the figure in history which Vivekananda admired most? I'm sure you know the answer. It was Buddha. Repeatedly, he says that Buddha is one figure in Indian history that he found worthy of the greatest admiration. So, this is how I thought you would talk about this. You have given us another perspective, which is also very interesting. But nevertheless, I thought I should just share with you my own thoughts about this. And the second point I would like to make is, that I did not see the point very much of contrasting Marx with Vivekananda here. Because to begin with, you see, Marx was not available in English throughout his life. Marx's Capital was translated in 1886, only 7 years before Vivekananda passed away. And I'm sure it did not reach India. And further, amongst associates, there was no one who knew of Marx's writings. And as you correctly pointed out, he knew the anarcho-syndicalists, but not the Marxist school. And moreover, because of shortage of time, I'm sure, sometimes perhaps you slightly simplified Marx's views. For instance, you quoted in the beginning Marx's famous statement about religion being the opinion of the masses, opium of the masses. But I'm sure you know that in the same sentence, the next few words that were written by Marx, where he said, his religion is the opium of the people, at the same time is the cry of oppressed humanity. That it is an effort of oppressed mankind to express their aspiration for something other than the wretched life they led, and so on. And again, Marx's contempt for Asia, yes, but that contempt he had for all rural societies. In Europe too, he had the same contempt, the way he talks about in Civil War in France or in 18 Brumaire, the way he talks about the peasantry, for instance. He says that they are like a sack of potatoes. He did not hold in high regard any kind of stagnancy and rural culture and its limitedness, the kind of rural idiocy that he saw. So it was a peculiar thing about him, but that is not specifically on India alone. And in any case, if you look at some of his writings around 1857, especially the two articles which you mentioned were not in 1867 or 1857. 57-58 he wrote them in New York Daily Tribune. And in those writings, you also see his fellow feeling for India, because he, as you know, he was an anti-imperialist. He was against imperialism as a product of capitalism. And he talks about India, it's very clear that he sympathizes with the Indian people who were crushed under British imperial rule. But on the whole, I would say that I enjoyed your presentation very much, sir, because the way you provoked our thoughts, and I do hope that you will like to give some thought to another way of reading Vivekananda also, not so much in his writings where he talks of history in a philosophical way, history with a capital H, but where he talks of history as experienced by us in modern India and in the context in which people of his kind lived and thought. So with these few thoughts, I will like to thank again the donors of the endowment which enabled this institution to hold this lecture, and I would particularly like to thank Professor Ashis Roy for an excellent, thought-provoking talk, and to those of you who are here in this vast hall. We have a small number led by the director of this institution, Swami Vivekananda. To all of you, I would like to extend my greetings. Thank you.
নমস্কার। এতক্ষণ চৈতন্য